Ah, yes, friends. On a Monday morning, it is OGP, One Giant Podcast, coming to you live on YouTube as well. Where, as we know, I am Adam Armbrecht, and over there joining me, the healthy, the wealthy, the wise, Mr. Andrew Mackwitz. How are we, sir?
I am well. It was a little bit of relaxation over the weekend. I actually saw a bunch of my family for the first time since everyone has been vaccinated. So it felt normal to have the kids outside running around. Life is feeling pretty good, Adam.
As well, it should. Yeah, we've gone back and forth with this a few times. Where I feel like some of our episodes start with the weather's coming around, and it's usually right before there is a a drop off. As far as then it was 50 degrees for 2 days, and it was rainy and cloudy. So I had a good Sunday with Courtney. We got out on the town, by which I mean driving around in the car, etc. So, but it was nice though, just sunshine. Went for a walk at the reservoir to be outside. So it was a good weekend. Was had by all, as we like to say. We do come in though. We had said previously that the doldrums of this lull before the NFL draft officially kicks off next week. And by the way, we were just talking probably Monday and Wednesday of next week, we're going to really get into our mock draft scenarios, what we think the Giants should do and what they will do, right? What we want them to do if we're in the room, and then what ultimately the choices they may make as they try to finish constructing this roster for the upcoming season. But in this lull, the Giants are still entertaining some guests. They're still having some sleepovers, a few slumber parties. And that is one Jason McCourty, who came in for a visit with the Giants on Friday, obviously a veteran in the secondary. What's your perspective on his visit? I mean, does that move the needle for you? Does it get you excited? We know it's a veteran depth piece. He's not a spring chicken. But do you think there's value to adding a player like that?
Well, what I think is most interesting about this is it does feel like the Giants are now becoming a destination for veteran players where, usually a guy like McCourty, who's 33 years old, has been with the Patriots, won Super Bowls. He's looking to say, where can I go to get another ring? And, the fact that he's coming in, visiting with the Giants. Now, granted, his play significantly slipped in 2020, but you look at the last 4 or 5 years before that, guy that had a Pro Football Focus grade in the high 70s consistently. If we could turn back the clock a little bit and maybe get a little bit out of him on a veteran free minimum deal, the Giants are not spending or allocating assets like a first round pick on a cornerback. Then I'm excited to bring this veteran leadership championship pedigree into the room.
The leadership, that's what I would be excited about with him, right? Experience and leadership in the locker room. But from an on the field standpoint, his best years I think are behind him, and maybe arguably even his mediocre years might be behind him too. And I'm not trying to knock, but again, 33 years old, you've seen the diminished play from him over the last couple of seasons. So I look at it from that standpoint. Yes, veteran and probably at a good price tag. And I also think this can be a little bit of indication that the Giants are just bringing players in, setting themselves up for draft is next week. Who are guys that we're going to want to have already had conversations with, right? Listen, we're going to wait to see how the draft goes. But if we don't find the right piece for ourselves for the Giants, 4th round or 6th round, because you're not going to go for a secondary piece in the 1st or 2nd, Jason, expect a call from us, right? You want to feel like you've already established that relationship. And obviously there's the Joe Judge connection there as well from his time in New England. So I think this is checking boxes. I'm not getting overhyped on what Jason McCourty would be beyond good veteran presence. And I think to your point about destination, if players want to come here, and even some guys in their prime, and we're giving out some big contracts to do so, but it does mean that you want to be a part of the upswing for something. And Jason McCourty may like the idea of being a part of the surging Giants as they try to get a division win here in the upcoming season. So we'll keep an eye on it. Yeah, go ahead.
The last piece I'll say about the Jason McCourty thing is he's also, if he ends up coming into the Giants, we're not asking him to play the lead role in the movie, right? Like he's going to be a complementary piece where situationally can he come in and play some good defense and help the Giants get off the field? Sure. We already have our lockdown corner in James Bradbury. We already have our emerging 25-year-old cornerback number 2 in Adoree Jackson. We wouldn't be asking McCourty to play every single snap, every down against another team's number 1 wide receiver. Bring him in. I'm sure you'll see his his play on the field and his grades and how he ends up looking significantly better.
Yeah, you're right too. Right. Put him in a less high stakes situation. He's going to look better because he could still play against the third or fourth wide receiver or situational football. So that's true too. The other thing, and obviously we'll see how it plays out. I don't think, famous last words, I don't think we'll hear anything about him being added to the Giants roster before the draft plays itself out. But who knows? We'll see if anyone else comes in for visits. The other thing that you brought up that I thought was interesting is obviously Mel Kiper, everyone's doing their mock drafts, but they're also kind of reflecting on where some of these prospects would match up from last year or vice versa, right? Trevor Lawrence, well, he would have been the number one quarterback in any of the last 3 draft classes. But for us and a player in Andrew Thomas, Mel Kiper came out and said, when he looked back at it, Andrew Thomas would be, if he came out this year, the 3rd best offensive lineman in the draft. And the question that maybe I wasn't sure what your thoughts would be on it. Is that a knock or a compliment? Because for me, when I went back and thought, okay, so you're talking about Andrew Thomas, Wills, Becton, and Wirfs. Those are the big names that came out early in last year's draft. We know that Sewell is regarded as, a generational offensive tackle talent this year. And then Rashad Slater would be the next name that comes to mind, right? Someone that the Giants may look at potentially in the draft. And he's been a rising talent. I took this as a positive. Am I wrong with that? That I took this as being, hey, with the way these players are regarded, these 2 guys in this year's draft, if Thomas was the next best guy that you want to get after, I think that's exciting to me. And it means that I think Mel Kiper is also referencing what Thomas looked like by the end of this past season as well.
So this is a tough one. So basically, Mel Kiper is just taking his victory lap in terms of saying, I had Andrew Thomas as the 3rd ranked offensive lineman last year. Oh, shocker. Tristan Wirfs and Jedrick Wills looked better than Andrew Thomas did. I'm going to take my victory lap and say, I didn't think he was as good as those guys last year. I still don't think he's as good as these upper echelon top tackles that are in this draft. And that's fine. His batting average is probably right around the Mendoza line anyway when it comes to whether or not he hits or misses on these players. But to me, look, if Andrew Thomas is a good left tackle, I'm happy. The Giants needed to do something. You and I both agreed that we thought Andrew Thomas was the tackle that the Giants needed to take in the draft. We were fist pumping and going nuts draft night when it actually happened. And look, Wirfs looked better last year playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Also helps to have Tom Brady back there, getting the ball out pretty quickly. Jedrick Wills looked a little bit better in pass blocking than Andrew Thomas did. So there's no 2 ways around it. Andrew Thomas did not look like the best offensive tackle last year. Mel Kiper is just kind of accentuating that and saying, and even if he came out this year, he still wouldn't be the top 1 on my book.
Yeah, because I took it from the standpoint of put all these tackles into this year's draft class, and Thomas would be the 3rd best on the board, as opposed to if only Thomas got put into the mix. But I think so. Again, I also think too, and we said this before about different players. It's hard for me to take a look at a guy and objectively saying Jedrick Wills and Tristan Wirfs really, and you were big on him at certain points last year when we were talking about the draft class coming out. It's hard to have referendums on these players after 1 year. You can get a real good sense of them, and when it's positive, when a player comes in and really performs early and performs well, that does excite you, right? But when you look at the teams that they were playing on, for example, Tampa Bay, there's a lot of talent on that team. There's a lot of talent on the offensive line. So I think it always puts rookies, young players at any position in a great spot to have early success. When we talk about Andrew Thomas last year and you think, well, who'd you have next to him? Well, it was Will Hernandez until he lost his starting job to our 5th round selection in Shane Lemieux. And then you go down inside and you say Nick Gates as well, new position at center. These are mild excuses at best, because you can go back and watch the tape and see how Thomas just flat out struggled early in the year, even when it was just solely based on what he was or was not doing. And also he got better. So if Kiper wanted, I will say this, taking a victory lap, it seems like an odd thing to do the year following around a player. And all I guess I could say is I hope that Thomas comes out and reminds Mel Kiper where all the hype was on him pre-draft, how people felt about him as a prospect, including himself, Mel Kiper, that is, and they didn't shift gears on him until the combine, when Wirfs really flashed there. And then the opinion started to swirl, and we ended up getting him at 4, obviously. And the rest of it, as they say, is going to be history. I don't know what else to take away from it other than I don't think this is something you can write the final chapter on yet.
Look, the Giants desperately needed a left tackle that could at least protect their quarterback. And by all accounts, Tristan Wirfs was a little bit more athletic. Jedrick Wills was a little bit more athletic. But the whole idea was Andrew Thomas, coming out of the draft last year, was the most polished and ready to start at left tackle of any of the tackles in the draft. So, his upside may not have been as high as if Tristan Wirfs, realizes all of his value, but going into it, we needed to stabilize the offensive line. And I still think Andrew Thomas can be an upper echelon offensive tackle. But you know what? Worst case scenario with Andrew Thomas, he is a starting tackle. What if he's just on a different side of the line, moving on in the future?
And Andy, that brings us to our next topic. What a transition. Pro's pro, as they say. Andrew Thomas and the potential move to right tackle at some point here. So wind the clock back here to 2020 when the Giants do take Thomas. Now, you're taking him high in the draft, so you obviously, I think your instinct is to say we wanted to place starting left tackle for us. The other piece, though, that we said going back to last year that scouts started to kind of come out and say, teams look at tackles as tackles. It's not necessarily blind side. It doesn't matter. Right or left, we just want a quality tackle to be at the end of our line. Obviously, you want it to be a good one covering the blind side for your QB, but ultimately it's about having talented players. When we look back, and for whatever Nate Solder has or has not been in his Giants career, he opts out. And we even said it back then, I think, yes, when you take a player high in the draft like you did with Thomas, you expect him to start, but also we didn't set the threshold as being he immediately has to come in and be a day one starter. There could have been a grace period for him as you're building him up. And I think at the time, we were really speaking to the idea of not a lot of training camp, right? COVID-19, all the restrictions. So do you want to throw a young rookie into the fire like that? Solder opts out. You end up with the issues that we mentioned along the line there as well. And suddenly he's thrust into it. First question for you would be, would this be a referendum negatively on the Giants if Andrew Thomas, a 4th overall pick, was moved to right tackle? Is that a black mark then? Should you not have been taking him then at 4?
Yes, but do I care? No. Like for me, I just want the Giants offensive line to get better. So if that means moving Andrew Thomas to right tackle, then move him there. But I mean, as of right now, Andrew Thomas is our left tackle. I still believe in his ability to mature. You saw the progression over the second half of the year, the last 4 or 5 games. He really started settling in at left tackle, seemed more comfortable. But again, if Penei Sewell ends up falling to the Giants somehow at 11, and everyone said he's a transformational tackle, like if you truly believe that, I have no problem moving Andrew Thomas to right tackle. I don't care what that says about the Giants, what it says about us liking Andrew Thomas more than the other tackles in the draft. None of that matters because the offensive line would be better. So if you're telling me there's a tackle available that is better than Andrew Thomas to play left and he has to slide over to right and he becomes a top 5 right tackle in the league, I'm happy because it means the Giants offense and offensive line specifically is getting better.
Yeah, and it's tricky, right? Because I think, it does make me think about the Saquon Barkley draft, right? 2 overall. Could you have traded back? Could you have gotten more draft assets? What could it have looked like? I've done this with Pessimistic Mike a number of times where we say, you could have just taken Quentin Nelson there and then taken Nick Chubb in the 2nd round. How would you feel if that's what you had gotten in that draft as opposed to Saquon Barkley and what ended up being Will Hernandez? But again, that's all retroactive thinking, knowing, and we knew that Quentin Nelson was supposed to be a really good prospect, but knowing that worked out and knowing that Nick Chubb worked out and that Will Hernandez didn't work out, you look back and go, boy, they should have done, right? I think it's the same thing with Thomas now where you'd say, would you go back and change your mind? I probably wouldn't. I do. There's some level of hesitation or reservation around saying, yes, I just want a good offensive line, to your point, right? And if it ends up meaning moving Thomas, that's fine. The scenario you said about Sewell falling, I think that would be very palatable because you'd be saying, remember, Sewell is regarded as a generational left tackle talent that's coming out this year. So when you draft someone like that, potentially, it doesn't indicate anything about Thomas or how you feel about him. It's just saying, boy, now we have really nice bookends. But if it isn't him, and we're going to get into some of the draft here in a little bit, if it isn't him, though, then it does maybe make me wonder. So, for example, what if you end up taking an offensive tackle in the second round and you feel like, so we can kind of transition into this draft conversation. What if it's Etchenberg in the second round out of Notre Dame, who everyone highly regards, but he's a pure tackle and a pure left tackle. That's the way he's scouted. This isn't a guy that kicks inside. How would you feel if you were saying our second round pick is now our starting left tackle and our number 4 overall pick is now our starting right tackle? Would you still come back to that same point? I'm happy, I'm satisfied. Or would you feel like, at least, I guess in the big picture doesn't matter, but in the short term you go, so did you F up? Is that what you're telling us? Did you make a bit of a whoopsie-daisy? Do you wish you had taken worse last year and had a guard and not, you know what I mean, and not worried about tackle, even though it was a glaring need? Or did you push the panic button and say, we need someone to protect our quarterback, and we're going to take Thomas in spite of reservations around his game?
But see, for me, Adam, like, once they're on the Giants, I really just don't care where they were drafted, how they got here, who's making more money, who's not. Like, none of that matters to me at all. If you told me that all throughout training camp that Matt Pert had put on 30 pounds of muscle and was the most athletic he's ever been in his entire life, and he looks amazing, and you are considering moving him to left tackle, I have absolutely no problem with it. Like, I just don't care. Well, Shane Lemieux is a 5th-round pick. Will Hernandez was a 2nd-round pick. Did I care at all last year when I'm clamoring to put in the 5th-round guy? It doesn't matter if it's a knock on the person that drafted Will Hernandez or not. The Giants just need to get better. What I will say, though, is if we do draft an offensive tackle and they end up doing moving Andrew Thomas to the right tackle and bringing that person into left tackle, my biggest challenge behind that whole thing is, well, now we're seeing another rookie left tackle for the 2nd year in a row. And we know it takes a little bit of time. We know that you need a little bit of experience to understand the speed of the NFL game. That's really the only thing that would concern me. But at the end of the day, I don't care. Give me Andrew Thomas, give me Matt Pert, give me Nate Solder, give me Slater, give me Sewell. Whoever is going to keep Daniel Jones upright, I want them at the left tackle position.
Yeah. That is ultimately how I shake it out too. And I think you're right. This idea of, and by the way, you can say, better NFL teams hit on more of those prospects, right? They do a better job finding their way to success in the early rounds of the draft, right? So when you miss on them, or when your number 4 overall pick ends up being your right tackle, it does indicate something about your scouting department and your ability to evaluate talent and having generally more success than failure, because now you're saying, well, hopefully Shane Lemieux, a 5th-round pick, ends up being, or even Pert, a 3rd-round pick, right? The percentage chances of these guys being successful are far lower, or should be far lower. But the net result is the team getting better? Are you improving across the board at these positions? So you mentioned, though, the draft there, and you highlight a couple of names like Slater. When we look at the NFL draft, and we're going to get into this next week, so I mean, listen, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of moving parts. Do you have clarity around the 11th overall pick? There's been so much that's swirled around. Well, if Waddle's there, the value is so high. Where is he on your board? Is he worth taking? Parsons and his maybe off the field issues, how does that affect the Giants' perspective on him? And how far back would you go into the draft class to say, well, our guy is Kwity Paye, and he may be 24th on the board, but he's 16th on ours. So, 5 picks too early. That's fine by us. We want to make sure we get our guy. Have you crystallized anything in regards to the draft?
I have. So watching a little bit of film, trying to think about the Giants and how this draft can play out, the depth at different positions. For me, I'm going to be honest, Adam, there's really only 2 ways the Giants can go about this. One is offensive line. If one of the 2 offensive linemen is there, maybe even Elijah Vera Tucker, if you really have him highly regarded, I feel like that to me is the clear-cut number 1 choice for the Giants. And number 2 for me, if the Giants are going to stay at 11, is take whichever of the wide receivers is still there. And I've been a guy that has said we don't need to draft a wide receiver at 11. Our wide receiver group is good as is. I mean, it could improve, it could get better, but we don't necessarily need to spend a high-end pick. But Adam, when I look at what else is out there, we talked about Patrick Surtain being there. At cornerback is not necessarily an area of need for us, so I feel like we'd just be overdrafting there. We talk about Micah Parsons. I have my concerns about him, not necessarily his play on the field, but everything else that goes around it. And then also, I just look at all of these edge rushers, and while I like Kwity Paye more than some of the other guys, I just feel like we're overreaching at 11 for guys that I'm not really that excited about, that should be drafted in the in the 25s and the 30s. And maybe we're probably better off getting a defensive end or edge rusher or outside linebacker in the second round or third round and spending the draft capital that way. So for me, it's really down to offensive line or wide receiver, and everything else I'm kind of just like not excited about at all.
That's interesting. The theory on the thinking on Waddle specifically, I would say, because by the way, you can go down a layer deeper and say, well, okay, fine. Slater's gone. Do you want to take Waddle? What if Waddle's not there? You're going to take Devontae Smith, as rumors say that Dave Gettleman may really like him. If I'm going to have to swallow a pill, but these are all talented players. And I said this before. I'm going to be happy with whoever they take at 11. It just may be my opinion about where they could or should have gone. If they take Waddle, I can really wrap my head around it and get very excited. If they're taking Devontae Smith, I have serious questions just about the decision of the value at that particular spot in the draft. Overall, though, I don't want to say I'm surprised, but I do disagree, though. When you come into this draft, you come into free agency, you bring in Kenny Golladay, obviously, you bring in Adoree Jackson, so you shore up two of these big holes. The Giants' two biggest glaring needs are offensive line and edge. Those are the two biggest needs. I don't see, if this is a different year and the depth at wide receiver is not as healthy and strong as it is in this draft class, then maybe I get it. And you go, well, listen, if we don't take Waddle at 11, we're stringing ourselves out potentially, and we may not have a chance in the second round to get somebody. When I walk through these, and it's going to look different probably next week because I'm going to keep running mock scenarios, as we say. But in a zero trade down scenario, when Rashawn Slater is there, you 100% take him at 11. I think you lock into it. And by the way, even if he's gone, I can be convinced, and won't take that much, that Vera Tucker is the player to take at 11, because a lot of boards you're seeing him go by 20. So that's not big enough of a margin for me to say, oh, I couldn't possibly here. If you do that, second round opens up to guys like Perkins for an edge rusher, even Joseph Osai, who I'm pretty high on. And even if you said, let's hold off and wait for an edge rusher, because you've brought in veteran guys, we have a lot of talent in that linebacker edge rusher room, you can go with a wide receiver like Diami Brown that I've highlighted before. And he's a dynamic talent that can do things out of every position in the wide receiver room, can blow it out over the top, can do it in the slot. And is he a Waddle? Maybe not that level, but also he's going to be a pretty big impact player, and you can do, both and value in both rounds and still accomplishing it. Me personally, and this is something I said in our pre-show, that I have come back around in a no trade down scenario to a friendly face that you may be familiar with. I highlighted previously guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown. Diami Brown won't be there in the third round. Maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown could be. Maybe Tylan Wallace could be. A guy that's starting to rise back up after falling a little bit, I'm starting to sweeten on, is your boy Josh Palmer. I think that there's a scenario where you could walk down Rashawn Slater, Joseph Osai, and then Palmer in the third round. And then when you get to the fourth round, you have an opportunity to go back into the linebacker group, maybe look at Ohio State. We talk with Jay Stevens, a guy like Justin Hilliard. So, there's some real value to be had in the third and fourth rounds. And again, you tell me to take a wide receiver in the first round, I'm going to get excited about what he brings to the table. But when you check those boxes in free agency, now check the next boxes. Before you don't double dipping. Don't be double dipping into the wide receiver waters before you at least check one of the two big ones. And that's why a Diami Brown in the second round, I get my head around. But you have to solve one of those two problems. I keep coming back to time and time again. Offensive line, because you don't know for sure if Lemieux is definitely the starting left guard. And if you have a question mark there and at least a mild question mark with Pert, you're saying maybe 2 or 3/5 of our line is still in a state of flux. So I need the quantified talent that I plug in and say, yes, he is our guy.
Well, well, well. Welcome back, Josh Palmer. That is one of my guys, as you know. I thought he was going to be maybe a 5th or 6th round selection. I think teams are starting to warm up to him more and more, and you're seeing him start to move into the Nico Collins kind of situation, which is that middle 3rd round is kind of his sweet spot because they like what he can do. I have no problem with the offensive line approach. It's my preferred situation in the 1st round. The problem is if the top 2 offensive linemen are not there and the Giants aren't sold on Vera Tucker, then we got to think about what we do. And I understand you said edge rusher is an area of need. It absolutely is. But for me, it's like if you have Waddle as like your 4th or 5th best player on the board and you have Ojulari as your 31st best player on the board and you're sitting there at 11 and you're like, man, we could get a top 5 talent in this draft and put him on the chessboard and allow Daniel Jones to have an embarrassment of riches, or we can overreach on a position of need just to say that we checked that box and filled the need. That's where it gets a little dicey for me. And while I do 100% believe the Giants need to get an edge rusher, an outside linebacker, however they want to do it in the 3-4 defense, I just don't feel comfortable reaching 15 or 20 picks too soon for a guy when there could be a top 5 talent out there that could be a game changer, game breaker for the offense.
And we've often talked about this, right? What is the margin on, like, to your point, if Ojulari's 31st and you're picking at 11 and the 5th best player on your board is there, you're getting tremendous value on the guy that's, quote, fallen to you, or you're reaching back to fill a need and maybe not getting the best. And earlier you mentioned as well, as far as the edge rusher position, and it does go a layer deeper on this, because when you think about, say, even a Parsons or anybody in that ilk, when you look at him, you say, yes, can you go out on 3rd downs to the edge and rush? Yes. But initially, you love what he's going to do at inside linebacker for you. Ojulari, flip it. You love what he's going to do on the edge for you, and other things are going to come in time for him. But I do think it's a valid point when you talk, Kwity Paye is a different mold. It feels like a throwback style guy off the edge for you in a lot of ways. But then you get into Owe out of Penn State, right? And you think about Tryon that we've talked about before, more into the 2nd round. But I don't know what is that margin, right, between some of these guys and these talents that are, if you're all facets, that's great. But if you're at least initially as a rookie, a one-trick pony, well, it's hard for me to lean into that in the 1st round, and especially at 11, right, as opposed to seeing how things fall. There can be those scenarios where you move up and try to get it to the top of the 2nd round or back end of the 1st because you like a specific player. I think that's a valuable option that the Giants can look at too. And that's, again, where I keep coming back to it. That's a fair point. And I think if I was constructing it, I would say offensive line, trade back, then wide receiver if you couldn't trade back. So if Waddle's there, I'm getting excited because I'm saying, hey, who wants him? Chicago, your boy's calling. You know what I mean? And maybe I can get some real value out of that, dropping back to 20, pick up the extra pick, and then start to look at edge rusher and inside and outside linebackers and supplement the roster a little bit, move around the board. But it's fair. And listen, we've kind of taken our slings and arrows over how we feel about what the Giants need or should do at 11. Nobody seems to by and large, fans think it should be Waddle almost 1,000% if he's available for you there. I just think, as we've seen in the past, going back to last year, you bring in quality coordinators, and then it's about providing weapons and filling in these need areas. And right now, the Giants still have a couple. And I get excited about a guy like Joseph Ossai, by the way, or Perkins. Perkins in the 2nd round. That's a player who had a plus 90 rating in both rush and pass defense. Joseph Ossai, plus 80 in both categories. So these are guys that can do both things, not one-trick ponies. You got to balance these books somehow. As we say, we'll be back in next week. We're going to be back in on Wednesday and on Friday. But next week, we'll really start to break down some of our mock draft scenarios. And probably the rest of this week, we'll talk about, here's 3 guys in the 2nd round that could make sense for an edge rusher. And then your task, Andrew Makowitz, find me the guy in the 3rd round. Find me the edge rusher in the 3rd round that provides real value that you could say, go wide receiver, then go offensive lineman, and wait until 76. Because by most metrics, if you're not getting an edge rusher in the top 50, you're getting a dart throw.
That is very true. I think you talk about the disparity between the positions and where you have people ranked. I think that's going to be ultimately, obviously, what the Giants are going to look at, because I do think they're going to add a wide receiver. I do think they're going to add an edge rusher. I do think they're going to add an offensive lineman in this draft. We just don't necessarily know the value that they're placing on each of these positions, but we're sure going to try.
That's it, my man. We will be back in on Wednesday. We'll break some things down. There's names that I haven't even begun to tantalize the fan base with that I think, again, first 3 rounds specifically, and then even that pick at 116. I think one of the things we'll talk about later in the week is, 190, 196 and 201. What can you combine to get value out of those 2 positions as well and maybe move up the board a little bit? As we always remind you, you can follow us on YouTube live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can follow us on social media, One Giant Podcast. Follow the podcast. Leave a 5-star review if you're so inclined. We've appreciated the support across the platforms as we continue to grow the beast that will be One Giant Podcast. But as Andy Makowitz wants, needs, and demands that
as always, let's go Big Blue.
Bang.